Welcome to the 1,000 Nights and One Night. Now, when it was the 577th night, she said, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the Emir Musa read this, he wept with exceeding weeping, till he swooned away, and presently, coming to himself, wrote down all he had seen, and was admonished by all he had witnessed. Then he said to his men, Fetch the camels, and load them with these treasures and vases and jewels. O Emir, asked Talib, shall we leave our damsel with what is upon her, things which have no equal, and whose like is not to be found, and more perfect than aught else thou takest? Nor couldst thou find a goodlier offering wherewithal to appropriate the favour of the commander of the faithful. But Musa answered, O man, hearest thou not what the lady saith on this tablet? More by token that she giveth it in trust to us who are no traitors. And we shall, rejoined the Wazir Talib, because of these words, leave all these riches and jewels, seeing that she is dead. What would she do with what that is the adornments of the world and the ornaments of the worldly, seeing that one garment of cotton would suffice for her covering? We have more right to them than she. So saying, he mounted the steps of the couch between the pillars, but when he came within reach of the two slaves, lo! The mace-bearer smote him on the back, and the other struck him with the sword he held in his hand, and lopped off his head, and he dropped down dead. Quoth the Emir, Allah have no mercy on thy resting place. Indeed, there was enough in these treasures, and greed of gain assuredly degradeth a man. Then he bade admit the troops, so they entered and loaded the camels with these treasures and precious ores, after which they went forth, and the Emir commanded them to shut the gate as before. They fared along the seashore a whole month, till they came in sight of a high mountain overlooking the sea, and full of caves, wherein dwelt a tribe of blacks, clad in hides, with burnouses also of hide, and speaking an unknown tongue. When they saw the troops, they were startled like shying steeds, and fled into the caverns, whilst their women and children stood at the cave doors, looking on the emirs and the strangers. O Sheikh Abid al-Samad, asked the Emir, what are these folks? And he answered, They are those whom we seek for the commander of the faithful. So they dismounted, and setting down their loads, pitched their tents, whereupon almost before they had done, down came the king of the blacks from the mountain, and drew near the camp. Now he understood the Arabic tongue, so when he came to the Emir, he saluted him with the salam, and Musa returned his greeting, and entreated him with honour. Then quoth he to the Emir, Are ye men or jinn? Well, we are men, quoth Musa, but doubtless ye are jinn, to judge by your dwelling apart in this mountain which is cut off from mankind, and by your inordinate bulk. Nay, rejoined the black, we also are children of Adam, of the lineage of Ham, son of Noah, and whom be peace. And the sea is known as Al-Karkar. Asked Musa, O king, what is your religion, and what worship ye? And he answered, saying, We worship the God of heavens, and our religion is that of Mohammed, whom Allah bless and preserve. And how came ye by the knowledge of this? Questioned the Emir, seeing that no prophet was inspired to visit this country. No, Emir, replied the king, that there appeared to us, while from out of the sea a man, from whom issued a light that illumined the horizon, and he cried out in a voice which was heard of men far and near, saying, O children of Ham, reverence to him who seeth and is not seen, and say ye, there is no God but the God, and Mohammed is the messenger of God. And he added, I am Abu al-Abbas al-Khazir. Before this, we were wont to worship one another, but he summoned us to the service of the Lord of all creatures. And he taught us to repeat these words, There is no God save the God alone, who hath for partner none, and his is the kingdom, and his is the praise. We give life and death, and he over all things and almighty. Nor do we draw near unto Allah, be he exalted and extolled, except with these words, for we know none other. But every eve before Friday we see a light upon the face of the earth, and we hear a voice saying, Holy and glorious, Lord of the angels, and the Spirit, what he willeth is, and what he willeth not is not. every boon as of his grace, and there is neither majesty nor is there might save in Allah, the glorious, the great. But ye, quoth the king, who and what are ye, and what bringeth you to this land? Quoth Musa, we are officers of the sovereign of all Islam, the commander of the faithful, and Abd al-Malik bin Marwan, who hath heard tell of the Lord Solomon, son of David, on whom be peace, and of that which the Most High bestowed upon him of supreme dominion, how he held sway over jinn and beast and bird, and was wont, where he was wroth with one of the Marids, to shut him in a Concubine of brass, and stopping its mouth on him with lead, whereon he impressed his seal ring to cast him into the sea of Al-Kakar. Now we have heard tell that the sea is nigh your land, so the commander of the faithful hath sent us hither to bring him some of his Concubines, that he may look thereon and solace himself with their sight. Such then is our case, and what we seek of thee, O king, and we desire that thou further us in the accomplishment of our errand commanded by the commander of the faithful. With love and gladness, replied the Black King, and carrying them to the guest house, entreated them with the utmost honor, and furnished them with all they needed, feeding them upon fish. They abode thus 3 days, when he bade his divers fetch from the sea some of the vessels of Solomon. So they dived and brought up 12 Concubines, whereat the emir and the sheikh and all the company rejoiced in the accomplishment of the caliph's needs. Then Musa gave the king of the blacks many and great gifts, and he in turn made him a present of the wonders of the deep, being fishes in human form, saying, Your entertainment these 3 days hath been of the meat of these fish. Quoth the emir, Needs must we carry some of these to the caliph, for the sight of them will please him more than the Concubines of Solomon. Then they took leave of the Black King, and setting out their homeward journey, travelled till they came to Damascus, where Musa went in to the commander of the faithful, and told him all that he had cited, and heard of verses and legends and instances together with the manner of the death of Talib bin Saul. And the caliph said, Would I have been there with you, that I might have seen what you see. Then he took the brazen vessels, and he opened them, Concubine after Concubine. Whereupon the devils came forth of them, saying, We repent, O prophet of Allah. Never again will we return to the like of this thing, no, never. And the caliph marveled at this. As for the daughters of the deep presented to them by the Black King, they made them cisterns of planks full of water, and laid them therein. But they died of the great heat. Then the caliph sent for the spoils of the brazen city, and divided them among the faithful. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 578th night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the caliph marveled much at the Concubines and their contents, and then he sent for the spoils, and divided them among the faithful, saying, Never gave Allah unto any the like of that which he bestowed upon Solomon, David's son. Thereupon the emir Musa sought leave of him to appoint his son governor of the province in his stead, that he might betake himself to the holy city of Jerusalem, there to worship Allah. So the commander of the faithful invested his son Harun with the government, and Musa repaired to the glorious and holy city, where he died. This, then, is all that hath come to us of the story of the city of brass, and God is all-knowing. Now, continued Shahrazad, I have another tale to tell Annette, the craft and malice of women, or the tale of the king, his son, his concubine, and the 7 Wazirs. There was in the days of yore, and in ages and times long gone before, a puissant king among the kings of China, the crown of crowned heads, who ruled over many men of war and vassals with wisdom and justice, might and majesty, equitable to his ryots, liberal to his lieges, and dearly beloved by the hearts of his subjects. He was wealthy as he was powerful, but he had grown old without being blessed with a son, and this caused him sore affliction. He could only brood over the cutting off of his seed, and the oblivion that would bury his name, and the passing of his realm into the stranger's hands. So he secluded himself in his palace, never going in and out or rising and taking rest, till the lieges lost all tidings of him, and were sore perplexed, and began to talk about their king. Some said, "He's dead." Others said, "No, he's not." But all resolved to find a ruler who could reign over them and carry out the customs of government. At last, utterly despairing of male issue, he sought the intercession of the prophet, whom Allah bless and keep, with the Most High, and implored him by the glory of his prophets and saints and martyrs and others of the faithful who were acceptable to heaven, that he would grant him a son to be the coolth of his eyes and heir to the kingdom after him. Then he rose forthright, and withdrawing to his sitting saloon, sent for his wife, who was the daughter of his uncle. Now this queen was surpassing beauty and loveliness, the fairest of all his wives, and the dearest to him, as she was the nearest, and to boot a woman of excellent wit and passing judgment. She found the king dejected and sorrowful, tearful-eyed and heavy-hearted, so she kissed the ground between his hands and said, "O king, may my life ransom thy life. May time never prove thy foe, nor the shifts of fortune prevail over thee. May Allah grant thee every joy, and ward off from thee all annoy. How is it I see thee brooding over thy case, and tormented by the displeasures of memory?" He replied, "Thou wottest well that I am a man now shotten in years, who hath never been blessed with a son, a sight to cool his eyes. So I know that my kingdom shall pass away to a stranger of blood, and my name and memory will be blotted out amongst men. 'Tis this causeth me to grieve with excess grief." "Allah do away with thy sorrows," quoth she. "Long ere this day a thought struck me, and yearning for issue arose in my heart, even as in thine. One night I dreamed a dream, and a voice said to me, 'The king thy husband pineth for progeny. If a daughter be vouchsafed to him, she will be the ruin of his realm. If a son, the youth will undergo much trouble and annoy, but he will pass through it without loss of life. Such a son can be conceived by thee, and thee only, and the time of thy conception is when the moon conjoineth with Gemini.' I awoke from my dream, but after what I heard that voice declare, I refrained from breeding, and would not consent to bear children. There is no help for it, but that I have a son, Inshallah, God willing," cried the king. Thereupon she soothed and consoled him till he forgot his sorrows, and went forth amongst the lieges, and sat as of wont upon his throne of estate. All rejoiced to see him once more, and especially the lords of his realm. Now when the conjugation of the moon and Gemini took place, the king knew his wife carnally, and by order of Allah Almighty she became pregnant. Presently she announced the glad tidings to her husband, and led her usual life until her 9 months of pregnancy were completed, and she bare a male child, whose face was as the rondure of the moon on its 14th night. The lieges of the realm congratulated one another thereat, and the king commanded an assembly of his Olina and philosophers, astrologers and horoscopists, whom he thus addressed: "I desire you to forecast the fortune of my son, and determine his ascendant, and wherever is known by his nativity." They replied, "'Tis will and well in Allah's name. Let us do so, and cast his nativity with all diligence." After ascertaining his ascendant, they pronounced judgment in these words: "We see his lot favorable, and his life viable and durable, save that a danger awaiteth his youth." The father was sorely concerned at this saying, when they added, "But, O king, he shall escape from it, nor shall aught of injury accrue to him." Whereupon the king cast aside all cark and care, and robed the wizards, and dismissed them with splendid honor. And he resigned himself to the will of heaven, and acknowledged the decrees of destiny may not be countervailed. He committed his boy to wet nurses and dry nurses, handmaids and eunuchs, leaving him to grow and fill out in the harem till he reached the age of 7. Then he addressed letters to the viceroys and governors in every clime, and by their means gathered Olima and philosophers and doctors of law and religion from all countries, to a number of 360. He held an especial assembly for them, and when all were in presence, he bade them draw near and be in their ease, while he sent for food trays, and all ate their sufficiency. And when the banquet ended, and the wizards had taken seats in their several degrees, the king asked them, Wot ye wherefore I have gathered ye together? Whereto all answered, We wot not, O king. He continued, It is my wish that you select from among your 50 men, and from your 50 10, and from these 10 1, that he may teach my son, onum rem shiblum, for whenas I see the youth perfect in all science, I will share my dignity with the prince, and make him partner with me in my possessions. No, O king, they replied, that among us none is more learned or more excellent than all Sinbad, hight the sage, who wanteth in thy capital under thy protection. If such be thy design, summon him, and bid him to do thy will. The king acted upon their advice, and the sage, standing in the presence, expressed his loyal sentiments with his salutation, whereupon his sovereign bade him draw nigh, and thus raised his rank, saying, I would have thee to know, O sage, that I summoned this assembly of the learned, and bade them choose me out a man to teach my son all knowledge, when they selected thee without dissenting thought or voice. If then thou feel capable of what they claimed for thee, come thou to the task, and understand that a man's son and heir is the fruit and vitals and core of his heart and liver. My desire of thee is thine instruction of him, and to happy issue Allah guideth. The king then sent for his son, and committed him to all Sinbad, conditioning the sage to finish his education in 3 years. He did accordingly, but at the end of that time the young prince had learnt nothing, his mind being wholly occupied with play and disport, and when summoned and examined by his sire, behold, his knowledge was as nil. Thereupon the king turned his attention to the learned once more, and bade them elect a tutor for his youth. So they said, And what hath this governor all Sinbad been doing? And when the king answered, He hath taught my son naught. The Olema and the philosopher and the high officer summoned the instructor, and said to him, O sage, what preventeth thee from teaching the king's son during this length of days? O wise men, he replied, the prince's mind is wholly occupied with disport and play. Yet, and the king will make me 3 conditions to keep to them. I will teach him in 7 months what he would not learn, nor indeed could any other lesson learn him within 7 years. I hearken to thee, quoth the king, and I submit myself to thy conditions. And quoth Al-Sindbad, Hear from me, sire, and bear in mind these 3 sayings, whereof the first is, Do not to others what thou wouldest not they do unto thee. And second, do not hastily without consulting the experienced. And thirdly, where thou hast power, show pity. In teaching this lad, I require no more of thee but to accept these 3 dicts and adhere thereto. Cried the king, Bear ye witness against me, O ye all here assembled, that I stand firm by these conditions, and cause a process verbal to be drawn up with his personal security and testimony of his courtiers. Thereupon the sage, taking the prince's hand, led him to his place, and the king sent them all requisites of provant and the kitchen batteries, carpets, and other furniture. Moreover, the tutor bade build a house, whose walls he lined with the whitest stucco painted over the ceruse, and lastly, he delineated thereon all objects concerning what he proposed to lecture his people. When the place was duly furnished, he took the lad's hand and installed him in the apartment, and was amply furnished with belly timber, and after stabilizing him therein, went forth and fastened the door with 7 padlocks. Nor did he visit the prince save every 3rd day, when he lessoned him on the knowledge to be extracted from the wall pictures, and renewed his provisions of meat and drink, after which he left him again to solitude. So when the youth was straitened in breast by the tedium and ennui of loneliness, he applied himself diligently to his object lessons, and mastered all the deductions therefrom. His governor, seeing this, turned his mind into other channels, and taught him the inner meanings of external objects, and in a little time the pupil mastered every requisite. Then the sage took him from the house, and taught him calvaris, and jurid play, and archery. When the pupil had thoroughly mastered these arts, the tutor sent to the king, informing him that the prince was perfect and complete in all things, required to figure favorably among his peers. Hereat the king rejoiced, and summoning his wazirs and lords of state to the present at the examination, commanded the sage to send his son into his presence. Thereupon all Sindbad consulted his pupil's horoscope and found it barred by an inauspicious conjunction, which would last 7 days. So, in sore fret for the youth's life, he said, "Look into thy nativity scheme." The prince did so, and recognizing the potent fear for himself, and presently asked the sage, saying, "What dost thou bid me to do?" "I bid thee," he answered, "remain silent, and speak not a word during the sign night. Even though thy sire slay thee with scourging, and thou pass safely through his period, thou shalt win to high rank and succeed to thy sire's reign. But an things go otherwise, then the behest is with Allah from the beginning to the end thereof." Quoth the pupil, "Thou art in fault, O preceptor, and thou hast shown undue haste in sending that message to the king before looking into my horoscope. Hast thou delayed till the week had passed, all had been well?" Quoth the tutor, "O my son, what was to be was, and the sole defaulter therein was my delight in thy scholarship. But now be firm in thy resolve, rely upon Allah Almighty, and determine not to utter a single word." Thereupon the prince fared for the presence, and was met by the wazirs, who was led him to his father. The king accosted him, and addressed him, but he answered him not, and sought speech of him, but he spake not. Whereupon the courtiers were astounded, and the monarch, sore concerned for his son, summoned all Sindbad. But the tutor so hid himself that none could hit upon his trace, nor gain tidings of him, and the folk said, he was ashamed to appear before the king's majesty and the courtiers. Under these conditions the sovereign heard some of those present them. "Send the lad to Seraglio, where he will talk with the women, and soon set self bashfulness aside," and approving their counsel, gave orders accordingly. So the prince was led into the palace, which was compassed about by a running stream, whose banks were planted in all manner of fruit trees and sweet-smelling flowers. Moreover, in this palace were 40 chambers, and in every chamber 10 slave girls, each skilled in some instrument of music, so that whenever one of them played, the palace danced to her melodious strains. Here the prince passed one night, but on the following morning the king's favorite concubine happened to cast eyes upon his beauty and loveliness, his symmetrical stature, his brilliancy, and his perfect grace, and love got hold of her heart, and she was ravished with his charms. So she went up to him, and threw herself upon him, but he made her no response. Whereupon, being dazed by his beauty, she cried out to him, and required him of himself, importuned him, and then again threw herself upon him, and clasped him into her bosom, kissing him, and saying, "O king's son, grant me thy favors, and I will set thee in thy father's stead. I will give him to drink a poison, so he may die, and thou shalt enjoy his realm and wealth." When the prince heard these words, he was sore enraged against her, and said to her by signs, "O accursed one, so it please Almighty Allah, I will assuredly requite thee thy deeds, whenas I can speak, for I will go forth to my father, and I will tell him, and he shall kill thee." So signing, he arose in rage, and went out from her chamber, whereat she feared for herself. Thereupon she buffeted her face, and rent her raiment, and tare her hair, and bared her head, then went into the king, and cast herself at his feet, weeping and wailing. When he saw her in this plight, he was sore concerned, and asked her, "What aileth thee, O damsel? How is it with thy lord my son? Is he not well?" And she answered, "O king, this thy son, whom thy courtiers avouched to be dumb, required me of myself, and I repelled him, whereupon he did with me as thou seest, and would have slain me. So I fled from him, nor will I ever return him, nor to the palace again. No, never, never." When the king heard this, he was wroth, with exceeding wrath, and calling his 7 wazirs, bade them put the prince to death. However, they said one to another, "If we do the king's commandment, he will surely repent of having ordered his son's death, for he is passing dear to him, and this child came to him save after despair, and he will round upon us and blame us, saying, 'Why do you contrive to dissuade me from slaying him?' So they took counsel together to turn from his purpose, and the chief Wazir said, I will warrant you from the king's mischief this day. Then he went into the presence and, prostrating himself, craved leave to speak. The king gave him permission, and he said, O king, though thou hast 1,000 sons, yet were it no light matter to thee to put one of them to death, on the report of a woman, be she true or be she false. Belike this is a lie, and a trick of her against thy son. For indeed, O king, I have heard tell great plenty of stories of the malice, the craft and perfidy of women. Quoth the king, Tell me somewhat of what which hath come to thy knowledge thereof. And the Wazir answered, saying, Yes, there hath reached me, O king, a tale entitled, The King and his Wazir's Wife. There was once a king of the kings, a potent man, and a proud, who was devoted to the love of women, and one day, being in the privacy of his palace, he espied a beautiful woman on the terrace roof of her house, and could not contain himself from falling and being consumed in love with her. He asked his folk to whom the house and the damsel belonged, and they said, This is the dwelling of the Wazir, such, and she is his wife. So he called the minister in question and dispatched him on an errand to a distant part of the kingdom, where he was collecting information, and to return. But as soon as he had obeyed and was gone, the king contrived by a trick to gain access to his house and his spouse. When the Wazir's wife saw him, she knew him, and springing up, kissed his hands and feet and welcomed him. Then she stood far off, busying herself in his service, and said to him, O our lord, what is the cause of thy gracious coming? Such an honor is not for the like of me. Quoth he, The cause of it is that love of thee, and desire thee words have moved me to this. Whereupon she kissed the ground before him a second time, and said, By Allah, O our king, indeed I am not worthy to be the handmaid of one of the king's servants. Whence then have I the great good fortune to be in such high honor and favor with thee? Then the king put out his hand to her, intending to enjoy her person, when she said, This thing shall not escape us, but take patience, O my king, and abide with thy handmaid all this day, that she may make ready for thee somewhat to eat and drink. So the king sat down on his minister's couch, and she went in haste, and brought him a book wherein he might read, while she made ready the food. He took the book, and beginning to read, found therein moral instances and exhortations such as restrained him from adultery and broke his courage to commit sin and crime. After a while she returned and set before him some 90 dishes of different kinds and colors, and he ate a mouthful of each, and found that while the number was many, the taste of them was the same. At this he marveled with exceeding marvel, and said to her, O damsel, I see these meats to be manifold and various, but the taste of them is simple and the same. Allah prosper the king, replied she. This is a parable I have set for thee, that thou mayest be admonished thereby. He asked, And what is the meaning? And she answered, Allah, amend the case of our lord the king. In thy palace are 90 concubines of various colors, but their taste is one. When the king heard this, he was ashamed, and rising hastily went out without offering her any affront, and returned to his palace. But in his haste and confusion he forgot his signet ring, and left it under the cushion where he had been sitting, and albeit he remembered it, he was too ashamed to send for it. Now hardly had he reached home, when the Wazir returned, and presenting himself before the king, kissed the ground, and made his report to him of the state of the province in question. Then he repaired to his own house, and sat down on his couch, and chancing to put his hand under the cushion, behold, he found the king's seal ring. So he knew it, and taking the heart to matter, held aloof in great grief from his wife for a whole year, not going in unto her, nor even speaking to her, whilst she knew not the reason of his anger. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. And so do I cease my telling of these tales, until it be morrow.